Did you know an SMS is read within 3 minutes of delivery? And that SMS is still the #1 business communication tool? Let Agility help you connect with your customers with a cheap and effective SMS solution. As one of Australia's top business SMS providers, Agility helps you and your business deliver your message, track campaign success, and drive customer action. Visit agility.com.au or call 1300 764 451 and chat to Peter and his team to see how SMS can help your business. Agility, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast. Do you have a loved one in need of aged care? St Nicholas Senior Care Centre in Punchbowl provides premium, personalised support that doesn't just support your loved one's needs, but respects their independence, providing a premium, welcoming community within which your loved one can flourish. You'll rest easy knowing that your loved one is in a safe, caring environment that doesn't just feel like family and home, but really is. Visit acare.au or call 02 8313 2200 to see how St Nicholas can assist your loved one. St Nicholas Senior Care Centre, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast. There's no Ouzo Talk without a bottle of Ouzo, which is why we love the Greek Providor. Get a real taste of the very best produce that Greece has to offer. From olive oils and delicious artisan sweets to unique spirits, earthy herbs and memorable wines. Visit thegreekprovidor.com.au to see their amazing range. The Greek Providor, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast.
Sound is.
Nick, they may say it's not the destination, it's the journey. And in many respects, that's true. But for us today, a genuine Odyssey comes to an end. And for you and I, my friend, it's unbelievable. It's taken us 3 seasons to get here. Can you believe that this is happening?
Classic, mate. Mate, I don't know about destination because we haven't really moved, have we?
Not really.
But Odyssey, from an adventure perspective, mate, it has been an Odyssey, mate. And how good is it sitting next to a living legend?
Absolutely. Well, look, to quote John Cleese, enough of this gay banter. We're going to jump right in because without doubt we have the biggest guest that this podcast has ever landed and we're ever likely to land, probably. We're incredibly excited to have this gentleman here. May I, Nick?
Definitely, mate. Indeed.
Okay, so our guest today is probably the world's most renowned Philhellene. He's among many things an English actor, screenwriter, author, playwright, journalist, poet, comedian, television presenter, film director, just to name a few, who's been entertaining international audiences for decades through his roles in TV shows such as Blackadder, A Bit of Fry and Laurie, and Jeeves and Wooster, alongside his good friend Hugh Laurie, I might add. He's played Oscar Wilde in the film Wilde, and is considered by many to be the voice of the Harry Potter stories, having recorded all the audiobooks for the hugely successful franchise.
Wow.
We're not done though yet, Nick. Not even close.
Oh, wait, there's more.
He hosted QI for 12 years, is a high-profile advocate for the return of the Parthenon Marbles, and since 2017, his Greek mythological retellings in books include Mythos, Heroes, Troy, and now most recently Odyssey, have become an absolute international phenomenon. Amazing books. He's shaken the hands of and known virtually everyone of consequence you've ever heard of, debated alongside the great Christopher Hitchens, Jordan Peterson, appeared on every TV chat show you've ever seen, including The Graham Norton Show, and most importantly, perhaps, Parkinson. Has also had then Prince Charles and Princess Diana over his house for tea. And after all that, Nick, he's sitting in the room with us right now. Stephen Fry, welcome to Ouzo Talk.
My cheers. Thank you.
Welcome, mate.
What an introduction. I really... Honestly, the only thing you forgot to mention was my modesty. But otherwise, it was very good.
There's probably a few awards you missed out. I noticed you had a dozen BAFTA nominations, a Golden Globe, and probably a dozen others, I'm sure.
If you live long enough and you can open a boiled egg without assistance, you get an award, don't you?
There you go.
Well, I really like the way that Michael Parkinson introduced you years ago, which was, it's easier to say what he hasn't done. You haven't captained England in cricket or anything.
Damn it. Yeah.
But
I have in my head.
Yeah.
But you have a relative that captained England, didn't they?
Well, C.B. Fry, yes, I do share some DNA with him. He was a very extraordinary athlete, Charles Burgess Fry. He was kind of king of cricket along with Prince Ranjit Singh in what was known as the Golden Age, which was the early 20th century. But he was a peculiarly gifted man, really. He held the world long jump record for 18 years.
Oh, wow.
He'd left his club where he'd had lunch, had a cigar on the go, put the cigar on the bench of his locker, got into his strip, did 2 jumps, one of which was the world record for 18 years, and his cigar was still alight when he got
good
back.
is that?
Not a bad day's work.
He also played in an FA Cup final in soccer.
Who did he play for?
He played for Arsenal.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was an
Gunners.
extraordinary athlete, absolutely amazing. He could, and people always say, no, it isn't possible, but it's attested by too many.
Yeah.
He could stand in front of a fireplace, his back to the fireplace, and jump backwards onto the mantelpiece.
Oh, wow.
That's extraordinary,
That's
isn't
a
it?
party trick.
It really is, quite astonishing.
How's that?
Unbelievable.
England
he,
cricket player, Arsenal.
And he was
fucking
top
long
of
jumper.
the class lists in exams at Oxford. He beat a lot of well-known intellectuals and writers. He was
Kidding.
so
Just
he
as a
was,
side note.
yeah, and he was offered the throne of Albania.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really strange. But Prince Ranjit Singh, who was, as the name implies, a kind of royal figure from India and the inventor of the leg glide in cricket, supposedly, and he was a member of the League of Nations after the First World War.
Yeah.
And when King Zog fled Albania, the League of Nations thought they need a king, they need someone to hold the country together. And Prince Ranjit Singh suggested C.B. Fry, but he actually turned it down.
There you go.
So I might have been a prince of Albania, who knows?
Wow.
There you go.
Unbelievable.
There you go.
Well, I have to say, on a personal note, you were recently in my neck of the woods in Corfu.
I was in Corfu. Is that where you're from?
That's where we're from, yeah.
You're a Phaeacian. You're
Correct.
Wonderful.
How was it?
It was wonderful. It's a gorgeous place. And, of course, I love it, especially because it's one of the very few. I think Malta is the only other Mediterranean island where cricket is played. There's a long-established British footprint there, as we know in the history of Greece. When things go wrong, the Greeks scream for a member of the royal family somewhere, either from Bavaria or from Denmark. And in the case of the Bavarian didn't work out very well, but Denmark, Prince Andrew, whose son Philip was born there,
correct.
Montrepeau,
Yes.
and then went on to marry Queen Elizabeth II, of course, Princess Elizabeth as she then was. So he was known as Phil the Greek to us.
There you go.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary history, that of your country, isn't it? But the mixture of peculiar. I love the idea that there's something about a member of a royal family from anywhere in Europe that qualifies them to be a king or queen in another country which they know nothing about. Yeah. I mean, what a Dane. I mean, why didn't...
Yeah.
And it's strange that the Greek government didn't say, well, we need a king, if they want a king. Why not get a Greek person?
Yeah.
Some wise professor of philosophy or a great
Correct.
warrior or something. But
Yeah.
no, we'll get a Dane.
There you go. Just on that, is King Charles now, is he connected to his Greek heritage through his dad, do you think?
Well, I know that he was very supportive of King Constantine, who was obviously a monarch in exile for almost his whole life, and then the Crown Prince as well. They were often guests of the royal family at Sandringham at Christmas and at various other, at Balmoral in Scotland and Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
As far as I know, he doesn't speak Greek. He does speak German,
Okay.
because there is obviously a German connection with the British royal family as well. And I think, like all the members of the royal families, they do stay in touch with each other. They have a lot in common. Mostly fear that they'll be overturned and that their reigns will end, and they try and sort of keep together.
Because he does wear that Greek tie. He's got a tie.
Yes, he does. Yeah,
He wore it here recently. He was here a couple of months ago.
I haven't been able to ask his opinion on the Parthenon Marbles. Well, at least I've been able to, but I've decided not to. It's unfair on him, really.
Exactly.
If he were quoted, it would get him in trouble.
Definitely. We'll get to that.
We're going to
Yes,
talk
we
about
will
that
indeed.
next.
We
Well, look,
will.
before we get into any kind of detail, shall we do the honours, Nick?
We should, my friend. Let's have a drink.
Wonderful. Stiniamas.
Stiniamas.
Welcome, Stephen.
Yamas. Yamas.
Oh dear. Nick, what are we drinking? Quickly.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Did you know an SMS is read within 3 minutes of delivery? And that SMS is still the #1 business communication tool? Let Agility help you connect with your customers with a cheap and effective SMS solution. As one of Australia's top business SMS providers, Agility helps you and your business deliver your message, track campaign success, and drive customer action. Visit agility.com.au or call 1300 764 451 and chat to Peter and his team to see how SMS can help your business. Agility, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast. Do you have a loved one in need of aged care? St Nicholas Senior Care Centre in Punchbowl provides premium, personalised support that doesn't just support your loved one's needs, but respects their independence. Providing a premium, welcoming community within which your loved one can flourish, you'll rest easy knowing that your loved one is in a safe, caring environment that doesn't just feel like family and home, but really is. Visit acare.au or call 02 8313 2200 to see how St Nicholas can assist your loved one. St Nicholas Senior Care Centre, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast. There's no Ouzo Talk without a bottle of Ouzo, which is why we love the Greek Providore. Get a real taste of the very best produce that Greece has to offer. From olive oils and delicious artisan sweets to unique spirits, earthy herbs and memorable wines. Visit thegreekprovidore.com.au to see their amazing range. The Greek Providore, proud sponsors of the Ouzo Talk podcast.
Quickly, yes, 35N, light and vibrant Ouzo.
From Crete.
All the way from Crete. Hey. Thank you to the Greek Providore for bringing it over for us. But I think we mentioned last episode, 35N, so it's the 35th parallel north of the equator.
Correct.
Which is goes right through Crete. That's how they got its name.
Well, Crete, it must be said, is celebrated more than just about any other Greek island for the quality of its food, isn't it? It's fantastic.
Yeah,
it really is.
Unbelievable.
It's the fruit basket of the Mediterranean.
Wow.
Obviously, you have in Corfu, you have that remarkable drink, kumquat liqueur, a sort of kumquatcello, as it were, which seems the tourists like at any rate.
It's a tourist drink.
It's a bit eccentric.
A little bit. I can't imagine getting drunk on something like that, on a night out, but maybe just a little tipple at the end of the night. But again, 35N, this is one of those drinks that we've had very often. TheGreekProvidore.com.au. Crystal, thank you very much for supporting us with your drinks and keeping us out of AA, or in AA as it were.
Classic.
But we do have a couple of other sponsors as well, don't we?
We do, yeah. I'd like to thank Peter Antonio at Agility. So
EDGILITY.
Beautiful. That's the one. And I had a look at they've got quite a lot of products out there as well. One's Touch SMS. So if you go to touchsms.com.au, create an account, you can actually send your SMSs from any device you like. Wonderful. So it's really good. Get on there, guys. Check that out. But Pete and his team, they do amazing things. I think he's president of the Happy Supper Club. We might have mentioned it a few episodes ago, which is like a charity event, which we're invited to, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
Another should be a lot of fun.
Another night of debauchery, right?
Exactly.
Fantastic. Mate. Well, agility.com.au. Get in touch with the guys if you have any size business and see how SMS and the guys at Agility can help you out. In addition, though, we also have St Nicholas Senior Care Centre here at Punchbowl, doing amazing work for our older citizens.
Mate, it's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it? St Nicholas, eh? Just saying.
What are you insinuating, Nick?
Mate, but how good is it? You go to it, they got cafes there, they got gyms there, they got a hairdressing salon and a cinema. How good
Stephen,
is that?
I don't know if you've seen this, or you wouldn't have seen this place, but I want to live there.
Very appropriate at Christmas time to celebrate St Nicholas.
Yes.
St Nicholas was actually Turkish, wasn't he? The one
you would know better.
The one who became our Father Christmas, yes. But then Turkey was a Greek kind of community for,
That's right.
for many
Yeah,
years.
it was what was it? It was Hellenic back then.
It was a mixture of Hittites, what are called
Yes.
Hittites in the Bible, aren't they, and Hellenics.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question as to whether we know if Hector shouted over the walls of Troy at Achilles, whether they both spoke Greek or not.
Yeah, well, that's
what language they would have communicated in.
Definitely. Yeah, look, we will touch on that. But look, with all our guests on Ouzo Talk, we always start off by asking you where your ethnicity is from, where your ancestors are from. Just give us a quick rundown of how far back where your ancestors go, and have you done a DNA test? Do you have any Greek in
I
you
have,
by any
actually.
chance?
I wish I had some Greek in me. That sounds like a Jay Medner line, doesn't it?
The next line is, would you like some?
Would you like some, exactly. I am, to quote, I think it's Kent in King Lear, a bastard son of a mongrel bitch. I have lots of bits. My father, I grew up thinking of a man who was positively English, because he had an Uncle George who wrote a book called The Saxon Origins of the Fry Family, because there were some members of the Fry family who thought that the Frys came over with William the Conqueror in 1066 from Normandy, and he wrote this book. I mean, it was not a huge bestseller, but the first sentence was, unlike so many so-called English families, the Frys did not come over with William the Conqueror. They were there to meet him when he arrived.
Oh, wow.
So he claims we were Anglo-Saxon, and I thought, so I'm half Anglo-Saxon, but my mother's family, I knew, was Central European Jewish.
Yes.
From Hungary, my grandfather, and from Vienna, Austria, my grandmother. That part of Hungary is now Slovakia, in fact. After the Treaty of Trianon, it became Czechoslovakia and so on. And, they've all been up for grabs, those bits of Europe. They survived, obviously, unlike their parents. Both my grandmother's and my grandfather's parents perished in the camps during the Nazi Holocaust. But anybody who's got Jewish blood in them, really, of that has the same story.
Yes.
Somehow we survived. And my grandfather he had the biggest refinery of sugar in the world, in his shtetl.
We saw that amazing "Who Do You Think You Are?"
Oh, you
episode.
did? So, yeah.
Unbelievable.
I chased him down there. Yeah. Yes, extraordinary. And some British government people invited him over to England to start up sugar refinery and production in the UK, because the First World War had shown that our supplies of sugar from Queensland and from the Caribbean would be severely compromised by submarines and so on if there were another war, which, as we know, there was. And so he went round teaching British farmers to grow sugar beet, which they'd never grown, ever, instead of importing the cane. So my mother was born, and she met my father. But interestingly, I did do that 23andMe, spit into a tube and send it off. And it came back that I'm 53.5% Ashkenazi Jewish. So my father, who had just died, didn't know that he must have been 3.5% Jewish, which I think would have delighted him. We grew up in it was a very sort of traditional English, kind of upper middle class background, I suppose you'd call it, going off to private schools and things, and being raised really more in an Anglican tradition than anything else, because the Jewish side of the family was not the least bit religious.
Right.
They were, they just got on with life. They didn't really play around. I mean, you've probably been into more synagogues than I have. I'm just simply not, I'm afraid, very knowledgeable about that side,
Right.
the Judaic side. But that's the peculiar thing about being Jewish. It's not a religion exactly, because you can be completely Jewish and not have an atheist like Einstein and Freud. But nonetheless, an anti-Semite will still hate you. So it's a race thing. But then on the left, they think you're white. On the right, you're non-white. So it's a peculiar thing to be. But it was never particularly important to me. I was proud of it, in as much as one's proud of one's background. But recently, of course, anti-Semitism seems to be on the rise, and then one kind of feels one has to take some kind of a stand. On the other hand, the behaviour of Israel is so monstrous at the moment that that's an embarrassment, and it's not the fault of Jews in London or Sydney, what happens in Israel, thousands of miles away, any more than it was decent for people to people to beat up and push off the street Islamic people, Muslims, because of what ISIS was doing in the Middle East and the bombs that were being blown off it. But people blame each other all the time, don't they? Yeah. But the short answer is, sadly, Greek, not in my DNA, but in my cultural, my intellectual, and my heart, then yes, Greek is there.
Well, I have to say that, everyone tends to describe you as being quintessentially English, but in our minds, you're the quintessential Philhellene. Right. So while you're not Greek, that Philhellene side of you, the only person that I can sort of parallel that I can bring is Lord Byron. Oh, which is pretty good company.
I would say.
How comfortable are you with the title of Philhellene, and how proud of you are?
Very, very, because I think it is a special feeling for a special place and a special influence on the world. Byron himself kind of mourned the fact that the Greeks he met and encountered during the occupation of the Ottoman Empire were not somehow in his mind as he imagined the ancient Greeks, the great 5th century Athens Greeks, or the great warriors like Alexander and Themistocles and so on, that they didn't quite match up. He wrote that wonderful section of Don Juan, his poem called The Isles of Greece. The Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sang, And I think we all feel that. I'm sure Greeks feel it. You stand in Greece in the middle of Athens or somewhere, or on an island, and you think, are these the same people who invented logic, mathematics, politics, democracy, ethics, everything that we know and love? Are these the descendants of Euclid and Plato?
We like to think so.
Euripides.
But I guess that's what occupation does to you, I guess.
Exactly.
No education,
Exactly.
So probably DNA, they're still there, but when it comes to education-wise, there's a massive decline and all that.
But I've certainly found that since doing my books retelling the Greek myth, that I've been very honoured by the fact that the Greek people themselves have liked the books and have written to me and have translated them into Greek, which I was not able to do. Then
we found something he can't do.
Then milu
Not yet.
Katholu kala elenika.
No, he can do that too. Right?
That was very good.
Well, thank you. And I'm speaking to Greeks. There is a proud sense of where they come from and what they have contributed to the world. It is a very real feeling and something to be encouraged, because it's not nationalistic in a dark sense. It is to do with connection with your ancestors who changed the world, completely re-envisioned what it was to be a people in every sense. And there are so many different reasons for it that you can speculate on. Good luck, good fortune to be in the Mediterranean at a certain time. The Greeks, the Dorians coming in, all the different, elements to make Greece. But at the same time, eventually the water level settled, because over history the sea levels had been really kind of unstable. And if you think about it, if you haven't got a stable sea level, you can't build a village by the sea, because it'll get flooded one year, or the sea will move too far out another year. But when it stabilizes, and it did, you could start to build a village by the sea. The village becomes a dock and a harbour and a port, and trading begins. And this is what magically happened in the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians in Tyre and what we now think of as Lebanon, and down the coast there, the Holy Land, as it used to be called. They traded and brought the alphabet. They brought Cadmus and the early heroes who built Thebes. And this, I think, what I absolutely love about the Greek spirit, the Greek ethos, to use a good Greek word, and that was unique in the world, was this sense of trying to improve things, of getting better, of reaching forward, of straining to improve. They could look across the Mediterranean and see a civilization like the Egyptian civilization, which for thousands of years basically didn't change. Unless you are an Egyptologist, you can't really tell the difference between two pylons or entrance ways, that are 2,000 years apart.
Yeah, wow.
But with the Greeks, you know what's Doric and what's Ionic and what's Corinthian, and you also know that all the stories in the myths so many of them are about heroes overturning their fathers. I mean, it all begins with one generation of gods who is destroyed by the next, the Titans, and then the castration of Uranus, and then the defeat of Kronos by Zeus. And Zeus being terrified that he's going to be overtaken by his own children as well. And then those heroes like Bellerophon, on Pegasus trying to fly to Olympus and getting cast down, or Icarus flying too close to the sun, and all of them just stretching, trying, and often failing. There's a great line by the English poet Robert Browning, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And this developed, didn't it, into Platonic philosophy, this idea that there is a perfect form of everything that you strive towards. You aim, you'll never get there. It is the Olympus, it is the sun. It will burn you if you did get there, but there is an ideal, a paradigm is there, and you try and get it. There is the perfect form of art, there is the perfect speech, there is the perfect solution to how we should live. We won't get there, but you have to have it planted in your mind as an ideal, and you stretch towards it. And that had never happened, as far as I'm aware, in any culture in the world, that this had been considered worthy of doing.
Yep.
And that means you change your parents' structures, and you change it, and they change, your children change, and everything moves forward. And we're used to that. That is the nature of the West, progress, we call it. And it is something I think the Greeks invented.
I've seen you speaking about the story of Prometheus. How central is that story to everything you've just spoken about there, that to sort of lead, it feels like that sort of leads, or is the catalyst for then moving into that direction of progress?
I think the Promethean story is one that is perhaps the most inspiring of all in Greek mythology. And to remind those listening who may have forgotten a bit about it, Prometheus was a Titan, one of the early generation of the of gods, who had a war with the next generation, the Titanomachy, the battle, the war of the Titans, and Zeus and his Olympians won, but with the help of a couple of Titan allies, Prometheus and Epimetheus, his brother, being two of them. Prometheus happens to mean forethought, and Epimetheus means afterthought. Well, not afterthought as in that child was an afterthought, but Zeus and Prometheus became very good friends.
Yeah.
And then you sort of imagine that one day Zeus says to Prometheus, we've beaten the Titans, the world is safe, we're on Olympus, I'm a bit bored. Can't we have a new species, a new race of beings that are not like animals, but are more like us? They can, legs and arms like us, and they can talk like us, and they can be our playthings, our creatures, and they will worship us and adore us and make sacrifices to us, and they'll make life really interesting. Prometheus would say, yeah, we could do that, but men and women, just for the time being, men only. I don't think Hera would be very pleased if I made too many women, because she's always being a bit strict against Zeus's roving eye. So Prometheus makes them out of clay, and Athena is brought to breathe into them, to give them life, literally to inspire. Or that wonderful word enthuse, to engod. Enthuse means to put God into, put the gods into someone. And so these little creatures come to life. And Zeus is delighted, and they bow, and they... Prometheus, though their creator, he adores what he has made. And he says, I'm going to teach them to hunt and to fish, and to throw pots and forge weapons. And whoa, says Zeus. No, you can... they can do anything they like. They can travel around the world, they can sail, they can catch fish. But what they cannot do, they cannot have fire. And Prometheus says, well, why ever not? He says, because if they had fire, both in the literal sense, the fire that roasts and toasts and melts and smelts, and the fire that is the divine fire, the self-consciousness, the thing that raises the gods above everybody else, this awareness of self that animals don't quite have, this consciousness, and language itself, of course, but the divine spark. They mustn't have it. Because if they did, said Zeus, they wouldn't need us. They would just get on with their own lives and they would be happy and satisfied. They wouldn't need gods. And we would crumble away. We would be nothing. We would disappear. And Prometheus promises to obey him, but he can't help himself. He loves mankind so much, he steals fire from heaven in a fennel stalk, rather peculiarly. He takes it down, and Zeus looks from Olympus and sees these points of light and is so angry, unbelievably furious. And he chains Prometheus or gets Hephaestus to chain Prometheus to the Caucasus Mountains. And every day an eagle comes to peck out Prometheus's liver. And because he's immortal, it grows back overnight. So this torture is repeated again and again. And it's a cruel, cruel, agonizing torture because Zeus is so furious. But he was right, Zeus, because mankind slowly, with fire, both technology, the fire of, what became the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age, but also philosophy and logic and thinking and discovering about how the world is, the gods became a sort of ceremonial statue in a corner somewhere, but they never really believed in them, and they crumbled away. Yeah. And what's magical about myth is that it says something so profoundly true that it constantly can surprise you. So that Prometheus myth is a creation myth, like the Garden of Eden or any other that in many mythologies have them. But when the Renaissance happened in Western Europe and people rediscovered the literature and life and thought of the Roman and Greek people, the rebirth, which is what Renaissance means, and the grip of the medieval ecclesiastical church was loosened, and the age of reason began. Galileo and Copernicus said that the church was wrong about the shape of the solar system, and that was a big one. And people began to start thinking. And by the early 19th century, Prometheus became a hero again, because he was a symbol of a new, not Christ who died and sacrificed and it was all about sin, but who loved us and who gave us the spirit to think for ourselves and be ourselves, to make us equal with the gods. Wow. Humanism, as we'd call it now. And within a very short space of time, Beethoven had written his wonderful suite of music called Creatures of Prometheus. The poet Shelley had written Prometheus Unbound, which is a dialogue between the god and Prometheus. And most famously, Shelley's wife, Mary Shelley, wrote Frankenstein, whose subtitle is A Modern Prometheus. It's about Frankenstein, who makes a human being in the way that Prometheus did. Yeah. He made us, and Frankenstein makes the creature. Yeah. And again, you kind of think another 100 years or so passes and people forget this myth. But now, we are unbelievably faced with the same quandary that Zeus and Prometheus faced, because we are creating entities. We call them AI. Yes. They have a certain amount of intelligence. They can do very clever tricks and calculations at enormous speed and solve problems and come up with descriptions and generate images and do things just like humans, but they don't have that spark. They don't have self-consciousness. And there are some Prometheuses around who think we could get, it's known as AGI, Artificial General Intelligence, where they just bang, something, it'll happen one day. These machines will be aware of themselves and be able to make their own decisions according to their own will, which is something, that's the spark. And then there are lots of Zeuses saying we cannot possibly allow that to happen because they won't need us anymore, just as Zeus said it. Yes. We're saying it, that humans will be in the way of these entities and we will be destroyed. So there's something about Greek myth that taps and keys into very, very profound truths about what it is to be human. And the way they do it is not by specific conversation and saying we are this and we are that, although philosophers do that. It's by telling stories. Stories that that illuminate and that give examples of just who we are and what we come from and where we could go.
Does it also come down to the fact that the Greeks, perhaps uniquely, our gods, their gods, were a reflection of themselves rather than this omnipotent, omniscient, this whole thing that's very much a more recent, Christian, Judeo, Islamic thing? How unique is it?
I think it's a really good point. I don't think it's unique that the Greeks think that. What was unique was that the Middle Eastern cultures, the Abrahamic tradition,
that's
produced Judaic and Christian and Islamic God who was perfect, who was all good. It's a strange, to me, way of imagining the God that created our world. With the Greeks, I feel, if you look around the world, whoever created it must have been, yes, majestic, beautiful, astonishingly powerful, remarkably gifted and creative, and so much beauty, so much splendor. But he must also have been, or they must also have been, capricious and mean and unjust and unfair, because it is an unjust and unfair world. Children die of bone cancer. There are diseases in Africa that make the eyelids turn inwards and destroy the eyeball of children, who live in agony, screaming. If there was just one lovely and holy and super God. Oops, so whose phone is that? Oh, it's him again. He does it on stage.
I think he just wants to get on camera. Come on, mate.
Come on, Tony.
This is my tour manager, Tony. He is unbelievable. He's supposed to be a performing professional.
Good on you, Tony.
Unbelievable.
Love your work, Tony.
Hilarious.
Wow.
But yeah, so the Greeks saw what the world was and said, this beautiful but totally unjust and capricious and arbitrary and contingent creation must have been made by people like that, who are themselves full of glory and majestic beauty and splendor, but also full of lust and utter injustice and cruelty and meanness. And it's that mixture in the gods. Yeah. And it's that mixture then that comes into the humans that are written about in the first literature, and that's Homer, because if you read about the Trojan War, most people will say there are maybe two almost perfect people in it. Hector, the Trojan prince, is glorious. And he's wonderful, and you just look up to him. He's Hector. And Diomedes, or Diomedes, depending on how you like to pronounce him, who's the Greek hero, great friend of Odysseus, is pretty perfect as well. But they are the least interesting in some ways, because all the others, like Achilles and Agamemnon and Ajax and Odysseus and Priam and Paris, are deeply ambiguous, and they can be fantastically heroic and beautiful and astonishing, but also really mean and unjust and cruel, and that's believable. That's
we love a good bad boy.
Because it reflects the world. It reflects truth.
Exactly. Look, before we get into all that, which I can't wait to hear your view on all this, where do you think mythology, in particular Greek mythology, where did it come from? Like, obviously, it wasn't written. Was it a bunch of guys sitting around a campfire at 10,000 BC telling stories? Where did it come from?
I think that's right. I mean, Carl Jung called it the product of the collective unconscious. Another great phrase I like is Joseph Campbell's public dreams. But if you imagine, because our species is much more recent than we give it credit for. We think we've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and we have as a species. But in terms of humanity that we understand and would recognize, language, which is the key, has only been around for 50 or 60,000 years. It's incredibly recent that our brains just changed. And we were able to do this thing that we are now doing and that your listeners are now doing. By the act of listening, they are as much engaging in language as we three are. So with the tools that had allowed mankind, fire, for example, and the things that can be made and forged from fire, we made up for something that Plato noticed in one of his dialogues. When man was created, it was clear that we had, I say man, I mean humanity, of course, we had great skills of intelligence and so on, but we didn't have anything to protect ourselves with. Animals have claws and talons and beaks, they can rip things open with, they can fly, they can swim underwater better than we can. They've all got some tool. Every animal has got a gift that allows it to survive, with the echolocation for a bat or whatever. And all we are is, as Shakespeare puts it, a poor, bare, forked animal. And so our gift was language, and that allowed us to make plans. Language has things like the future tense. It's one thing to show a stone and say, well, all you need in language is just to go, oh, stone. But it's the fact that you can say, let's meet in 2 sunsets' time at the place where we killed that goat. And then you're giving a complex idea and making a plan. The person listening will know 2 sunsets' time is a particular occasion, and they'll remember killing the goat and where it was. I mean, that's what language can do. Yeah. Before language, you would have to go to that place and point at it. And everything in human life is, and in animal life is about saving calories. It's about giving yourself more time. And we suddenly had time to sit and chat because we had the tool. And everything in the world that we don't understand, a force that we don't understand, we give it agency. It becomes a god. So the thunder, what the hell is it? It rains, it can only be a god. It's the sky god. Yep. So you call it the sky god. Then there is fire coming from mountains, and that's the Vulcan in Latin, from which we get volcano. Hephaestus, that god, the god of fire. And then you get a god that pushes flowers out of dead twigs at springtime. That's a force, again, that you cannot understand. Only later, when science understands it, do all the gods go out of it. And so you because you guess, that there are the children sitting around. Mummy, why, where does this come from? Yeah. Where does that come from? Who makes that sound outside? What is it? Who made the lion? Who made the horse? And you start to tell a story, and then the children tell their children a story. It's like video games. You're too young to remember, but in the original video games on a black and white television, there'd be a thing pong. Yeah, that's right. It was just a sort of oblong that would go up and down the side with a ball that was square.
Which was Steve Jobs' game, apparently.
Yeah, he
designed it.
Yeah, he was one of his. He was involved with it. But then each iteration of Moore's law and the amount of transistors you could fit into the same space and the technology improving, they started to become colour, and then they were less blocky. They were anti-aliased, as the phrase goes. They became smooth, and they became smoother and smoother, and the movement became less flickery until they became, great, wonderful things that we see now on your PlayStation 4 or whatever. And it's the same with the gods. The first ones were just, earth, sky, mountain, and they were, they were just primitive gods like Uranus. But then, kind of over the years, as the stories got told, the gods got more and more human, more and more rounded, more and more 3D, more and more high res, if you like, until they became a literature. Yeah. That was what is extraordinary about the Greek myths. They became a literature because of Hesiod and Homer. Suddenly they were written down, and because the coincidence of Phoenician alphabets and so on, they could be now written down and transmitted as documents and have a kind of, not exactly authority, because they weren't religious documents that told you how to behave. They were just agreed stories about the different families and interconnections with the heroes and who are demigods and all related to each other.
So it's like an explanation of why things happened. Yeah. There's no explanation, or it's probably a god.
Etiological is the fancy word for it. Yeah. And the nice ones, the ones that we always love as children, are like why do spiders weave webs, and you tell the arachne story.
Yeah. Brilliant. Beautiful. Look, I'd love to start talking about Troy. So I understand there's a guy called Schliemann who says he discovered, I think the 5th out of the 9 cities of Troy in Turkey. Yeah. Was it true? Was Turkey a true place, and how true is Troy?
Troy.
Was it a true place, and how true is the Iliad?
It's an interesting question, and it's undecided. But Heinrich Schliemann, as you say, was a 19th century German-American. He was a real showman, and he was a bit of a fraud. And certainly as an archaeologist, he was a disgrace by modern standards, because he just hacked away. He didn't do any careful brushing with a little, the way archaeologists are now trying, desperate to keep things. But he believed, which no one at the time did, that there was a real place called Troy. He had already been to Mycenae and in the Peloponnese, and he had shown a few palaces and the Megaron, the great hall of the palace there, and this extraordinary gold object that is known as the Mask of Agamemnon. And he went to a place called Hisarlik in kind of the Dardanelles. It's an area that all Australians know well, because Gallipoli is there. And it leads into Turkey and into the Black Sea, and then, of course, into the...
It's named after a Greek god, isn't it? Dardanelles?
Yeah, indeed, Dardanelles. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I know.
He's done his homework.
And, of course, it was immensely important as the sort of easternmost part of the Aegean and for trading. And so archaeology now shows clearly that there were cities at that place, and that they traded, and they traded very successfully. What Schliemann showed was that there was a sign of one of those cities having burned down. There were layers that you find when you dig, and one of them showed an immense amount of damage, and that. So he immediately said that was Troy, when Troy was burned down after the wooden horse went in, and the Greeks ransacked the place, and he found some amazing artifacts that he called Priam's treasure, Priam being the king of Troy, of course. And
Helen's jewellery, supposedly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All of that. I mean, none of that is really believed, but it gives the idea, and it's certainly true, that there was trade between this powerful, rich civilization, Hittite, the Bible calls them, that is now Turkey and Anatolia and Lydia and all the other areas that are there, Phrygia and so on, where Midas came from. And a lot of the heroes and characters in Greek myth come from that side, from Asia Minor, as it used to be called. Perfect. And in Homer, there are moments that show you that again, we don't know that Homer was a real person, and it could have been a number of different bards, but there is there's a continuity of style in each one of the two epics. Yeah. But a thing occurred just recently which absolutely staggered me, and I found it quite difficult to talk about because it sounded almost facetious or making light of a terrible tragedy. But you may know that it's quite famous that in the Odyssey, Odysseus, when he's sailing around, one of the things he's warned about by Tiresias in the underworld and by Circe, his lover, the enchantress, is that he will have to encounter at some point Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is this terrible monster who lives at the top of a cliff and reaches down and snatches sailors from boats. But it's in a narrow strait, and on the other side of the strait is a whirlpool waterspout that sucks ships down, smashes them up, and then spews them up, and that's called Charybdis. And he has warned Odysseus that if he does go through the strait, which he has to do to get home, then he should stay closer to Scylla, even if it means he loses some of his men who will be killed, because if he goes too close to Charybdis, the waterspout. Anyway, you will find in my book, Odysseus, there's a map in the end papers that shows the places that scholars think these things happen. Wow. And it's generally believed that Scylla and Charybdis, the strait that's being described is the Strait of Messina, which is the strait between the western coast, no, not the Peloponnese, the western coast of Italy, of Calabria, and the eastern side of Sicily.
Ionian,
right, the other side.
Yeah.
And so that is, where you will find people say, where was Scylla and Charybdis? Straits of Messina between Sicily and Italy. All right. Got it. Now, a few months ago, the Bayesian, a yacht owned by a billionaire, was in exactly that place, and there was a waterspout, a whirlpool waterspout that destroyed the Bayesian, the yacht. Wow. And they were almost all of them killed.
Yes.
And And I know you're laughing, and that's the problem. It almost seems funny, but of course it was a terrible tragedy for the people. But what it shows, I think, is that Homer knew the Mediterranean Sea and that it was capable of some of these disasters. They weren't just made-up fantasy stories. Let's imagine a big whirlpool and waterspout. In the adventures of Odysseus getting home, he encounters real dangers that were present for sailors at that time and still are today. That's what's so astonishing, I think.
That was like 6 months ago. Do you remember that incident?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes.
So that's where they think it happened.
They've always thought that. They've always said the Straits of Messina is where Scylla encrypted. Well, it's kind of, it's a sort of suggestive, shall we say. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just finished reading Odyssey a couple of weeks ago. Amazing book. Well, congratulations on it. I mean, it's to my thought, it is probably the best of the four.
I sort of agree, and I'm glad you think so. Yeah. I mean, there's something about that story. We can talk about the wonderful Greek word nostos, which is the journey home is nostos. It means a lot to Greeks. And I wrote in one of the earlier ones about the little-known Olympian goddess, or I say Olympian, she basically stepped down from Olympus. She's a very gracious goddess, but she was one of the 6 who were born to Rhea and Kronos, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, Hera, and Hestia. People forget Hestia. The Romans called her Vesta, and we know about the Vestal Virgins. She was the goddess of the hearth.
Yes.
Now, the hearth was so important to Greeks because it's home.
Yes.
And because of the things I've spoken about, the settling of the sea, they became great traders and fisherfolk, the Greeks. And they were, their families were waiting for them to come home, and they themselves were desperate to get home. And to this day, as we know, Greeks go to their home islands at Easter time, or they go to their home village. There is this sense of home. Mm-hmm. And they have a word for it, which is nostos. And the hearth, which makes the home, Hestia's, domain, the hearth, is in the English language. I've kept using the word hearth. It is the same root as the word heart. Yes. And cardia is sometimes used to mean hearth in Greek. Oikos is the word now used as in economy and the home, anything to do with oikos, spelled oikos but pronounced oikos in modern Greek, of course. And anyway, that the Latin for hearth is focus. And we've taken that to mean anything we concentrate on, we focus on. And the hearth is where we belong. It's the flames around which we tell stories. Yeah. And even up into the 20th century and early 21st century, the television was kind of the hearth about which the family sat, a flickering light with stories coming out of it. That's now been fragmented into streaming from different sources. The children sit in different rooms watching different programs, eating different food delivered in different companies. And so, everything's changed. Yeah. And the hearth has gone, and that sense of nostos and home, perhaps. In the 16th century, a Swiss academic, a doctor, noticed that Swiss mercenaries who were being paid huge sums of money to fight on the two sides of the 30 Years' War, a huge religious war that took place in the 16th century in Europe, they were getting ill because they missed Switzerland so much. So he coined a word which was nostos pain, nostalgia. And we use now nostalgia often to use as a time. But the Odyssey is the ultimate book of nostos, of getting home. How do you get home?
Wow.
And his agonies under his journey, it takes him 10 years to do it. He's imprisoned on an island for 7 of them by Calypso. He's there with Circe for another long period. He encounters Polyphemus, the giant.
Calypso, actually we were on Calypso Beach last year together.
Yeah. Oh, were you? How funny. There you go.
Just off Corfu.
Yes, indeed. And indeed it is the Skerians of Corfu, the Phaeacian people, who actually finally send him home because they hear his story.
Interestingly, where my wife is from, the part of Corfu where she's from, Peliocastrica, is supposedly the bay where Odysseus washes up.
Very interesting.
We like to claim it anyway.
I want to read because it's short.
Please.
Yeah,
but I
100%.
think it is, because we've talked about great myths and stories and poets and great artists of the Greek culture of the past. Yeah. But there are some 20th century geniuses too. One of my favourite poets in the world is Constantine Cavafy, who was a Greek poet. And this is relevant, and I carry it around with me, so I hope I have it here.
That's all right.
Here we go. This is a poem of his called Ithaca. And Ithaca, of course, is where
and I was there last year too.
Yeah. But what this poem says, it's a cliche to some extent, is it's the journey, not the destination, that matters. But he's basically saying we all have to have an Ithaca. It's incredibly important to have one. But by the time you get there, it doesn't matter. It's the journey that has provided you with everything. We all, and this is the poem, Ithaca. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your road is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery, Lystragonians, Cyclops, angry Poseidon. Don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way as long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and your body. Lystragonians, Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them along inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you. Hope your road is a long one. May there be many summer mornings when, with what pleasure, what joy, you enter harbours you're seeing for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, sensual perfume of every kind, as many sensual perfumes as you can, and may you visit many Egyptian cities to learn and go on learning from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Arriving there is what you're destined for, but don't hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years, so you're old by the time you reach the island, wealthy with all you've gained on the way, not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvellous journey. Without her, you wouldn't have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you will have understood by then what these Ithacas mean. Isn't that a wonderful poem?
That is unbelievable.
Wow.
And Cavafy was a remarkable. He lived in Alexandria, and he was discovered really for the English-speaking people by E.M. Forster, the novelist, who then passed on the information about this remarkable poet to W.H. Auden, and he began to get translated and popular in the West.
I have to say, Stephen, that is the perfect metaphor for this podcast.
Oh, wonderful!
Because, as I said in the intro, it's been a bit of an odyssey to get you into this room for us. And along the way, we've met so many amazing people.
That's it.
Including for our mutual friend, Professor Paul Cartledge.
Yes, wonderful Paul. Yeah.
And we've learnt so many things from so many different people, whether they
Definitely.
be, Professor George Paxanos, who mapped the human brain, or, writers, scholars, artists,
Businessmen,
comedians.
artists,
I
yeah.
mean,
You must try and get Victoria Hislop. Do you know Victoria? She's a...
well, not personally, but yes, we do know.
Yeah, she's a wonderful Philhellene as well.
Yes.
In fact, she's been made an honorary citizen.
Is that right?
Wow.
Yeah, I was very... this is very comic and people always laugh. And it's because of J.K. Rowling doing something absolutely terrible that she didn't know she was doing.
Yeah.
The Greek government very kindly decided to give me an award, an ancient, since independence, so a 200-year-old medal. It's called the Order of the Phoenix.
Ah, yes.
And there is, of course, a Harry Potter book called Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. And so when that came out, I mean, it would be like she brought out a book called, Harry Potter and the Order of the Garter, which is a genuine honour in Britain and the oldest, order of chivalry. People would say, no, you can't pretend that belongs to the magic world. It already exists. Yeah. But she called it the Order of the Phoenix, and the Greek government didn't complain. They just thought, well, we've got an older Order of the Phoenix. Yeah. So I am a holder of the Order of the Phoenix. Wow. But when I tell people, they just go, come on. So you're a muggle.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the Odyssey, because, I mean, just to sort of summarize it, how important is that text in terms of Western civilization? Does it underpin a lot of our literature?
It absolutely does. The way the story is told, it's psychological truth, it's multiple levels of storytelling make it very, very modern. It goes forward and back in time. It's a lot of it is told by Odysseus himself in the first person, and other parts aren't. The gods are involved. There are different scenes. It throws cinematically backwards and forwards in the most remarkable way, always heading like an arrow towards Ithaca. And when it was rediscovered, when Homer was rediscovered generally and translated, a man called Chapman translated Homer into English, for example, John Keats wrote a poem called On First Reading Chapman's Homer, and he describes it as like being Cortes standing on the peak at Darien and first seeing the Pacific, never knowing it existed. The first European to see the Pacific, you know. Or then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. And it was that, he writes about it so beautifully, Keats, this stunned effect that it had on the poets and artists and intellectuals and thinkers and readers of England and Germany and France and all these other countries when, you know, finally we were allowed to read these texts. We were no longer told what to read by the monks and the bishops.
Yes.
And it was transformative because it showed, it connected us backwards and made us realize we're not slaves to medieval ways of thinking, but that this idea of human emotion and passion and gods who are kind of metaphorically so convincing, you know, Athena, this great figure in the Odyssey, her wisdom, and in Homer, she's there and she's not there. You know that even back as far as Homer's time, he doesn't really believe she involved herself in the final battle against the suitors, but you know, he puts an owl up there because that's her bird, you know, in the rafters looking down, and I think for the readers of it, they suddenly saw, and I think, for example, that's why the novel developed. I think they read the Odyssey and they realized this was a new way to tell stories, and so Cervantes first, perhaps, I'm pretty sure Cervantes read the Odyssey, but then in the 18th and 19th centuries, the novel really exploded all over Europe. I think it was the inspiration of the Odyssey more than anything else, particularly the Odyssey. It's the more modern, because the Iliad is all set in only whatever it is, 9 weeks or something.
Yes.
Very, very, unified time and place and a very specific episodes, and much more. The gods are really, really involved. You know, there's a moment where Ares gets cut, moans about it. And so, whereas in the Odyssey, it's much more human, and it's a story about stories as well.
Yes. Well, just on that, are you aware of the recent push? I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal in 2020 about how there were schools in the US that were pushing to ban the text, along with a bunch of others. And I've got a quote here from the journalist. Critical theory ideologues, school teachers and Twitter agitators are purging and propagandizing against classic texts as part of a movement to rebuild the literary canon using what they say is an anti-bias, anti-racist critical literary lens. I mean, it staggers me to read the comments like the one I'm about to read to you. Be like Odysseus and embrace the long haul to liberation, and then take the Odyssey out of your curriculum because it's trash. And then that was responded to by a 9th grade English teacher from Massachusetts who said, haha, very proud to say we got the Odyssey removed from the curriculum this year. What do you make of comments like that? I can't imagine a curriculum that doesn't have it.
It's pathetic. It's just simply pathetic. It's not to decry other cultures and their achievements, which are remarkable and different. But our culture comes from a certain series of influences. We were not influenced by, Indonesian theatre, which is an ancient form that the tribes and peoples of Indonesia performed for hundreds of years, because we never discovered it, and it never translated into things that we used to define our sense of who we are. We've later discovered, of course, many works of art or ways of presenting humanity from other peoples, and they are valuable and they're interesting. But our own comes from certain places. You can't go round the cities of Australia and England and Germany and France and remove buildings that have pediments and metopes and triglyphs and columns that come from Greek architecture. Or that have arches that come and vaults and domes that come from the Roman change of Greek and their version of it. That is how our architecture built. It built up. That's how our buildings became buildings. And what they're saying is, let's pull these buildings down because they're not the same buildings that they build in Rwanda or something.
Yeah.
And it's a pathetic attempt. It's patronizing beyond belief on the part of these people. It's patronizing of other peoples that they feel they have to be somehow pushed forward. No, as if they're children. It's as patronizing as the missionaries and empire builders. It's absolutely pathetic. It's laughable, and of course it is meaningless and feeble and will make no difference, because I'm happy to say, and you may have noticed this, that more and more children are asking to study classics, ancient civilizations. They often not necessarily want to learn the language because it's difficult to speak Latin and Greek, but they want to read the philosophy and the drama and the history and the culture of the great Athenian civilization and different civilizations around, like the Roman and even the earlier ones like the Babylonian and so on. People are very interested in Gilgamesh and they're interested in other stories from that period. And it won't stop them from looking at ancient Chinese stories and ancient Russian myths. And there are all kinds of things.
It is.
It's got to be said. Like, my son's just 6 years old and he came across Jason and the Argonauts on TV and Clash of the Titans. And all of a sudden, he was like, Daddy, tell me a little bit about this. And he's very inquisitive like that.
Yeah.
6 years old, and he's wanting to get into it. This was not me trying to push him. But there's a natural... I mean, that's obviously Hollywood is the gateway to, to get into that. But there's such great stories, and they're still ring true.
Yeah. And I think we needn't worry about these American academics. They've hit their high point of stupidity, and it's so apparent how dumb they are that really no one is paying them any attention anymore. It's a shame because they dishonour the subjects that they're supposed to represent, and they dishonour very important moves to make sure that different cultures are represented properly in the world, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But they make it such a fad and such an extremist nonsense that they actually turn people against more sensible ways of being diverse, and it's
definitely
it's a joke.
Look, I just want to change tact a bit, but look, I loved your debate on Intelligence Squared. I think it was 2012 with the Parthenon Marbles.
Unbelievable.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Are you still as passionate now about the Parthenon Marbles? And more importantly, where are we at with it, man?
It's going to happen. I promise you it will happen. It's maddeningly slow. I think she's called Lisa Nandy, the new culture secretary under the recently elected Labour government that we have in England at the moment, and she's very sympathetic to it, I know. There's been a real problem of ping-pong being played between Parliament, saying it's not up to us, it's up to the trustees of the British Museum, and the British Museum saying, it's not our fault, it's because there's an Act of Parliament. Well, actually, being in Australia, it's a very good place to be because it shows what a weak argument it is. For many years, astonishingly, the Australian Constitution, the original constitution of your nation, federalising Australia and creating the states and the government and parliaments and so on that you have, was kept in the British Museum, the original document.
Wow.
And under the same Act of Parliament, it couldn't be moved. Well, what happened is the Australian government said, "Excuse me, can we have our constitution, please?" And the British thought,
just casually.
What did they say? No.
They said this has been embarrassing. There's an Act of Parliament, but that's no problem. It took 10 minutes in Parliament to nod it through.
You're joking.
And the constitution got sent. So the same could be done with the Parthenon Marbles. And the way I put it is that it could be such a win-win for the British Museum, of which I said in the debate, I think 92%, because I thought that what I was told was ridiculous, but actually it is genuinely 99% of everything the British Museum holds is out of sight.
Oh, wow.
All you see is 1%.
Really?
That's how much they hold. So it's not as if they're going to run out of things to show.
Yeah,
But the Duveen Gallery, where the Parthenon Marbles are, What you can do, of course, with LiDAR and laser and so on, is you can recast and have an exact copy every pit and pore of the marble.
We spoke to those guys.
Show.
From Oxford. Yes, we did. The digital archaeology guys.
And with the newest generations of glasses that will, there won't be the great big Vision Pro types. They'll be just like ordinary glasses you can put on. You can then see how the Parthenon marbles came from during the Ottoman Empire, how they came in the early 19th century over the sea from Lord Elgin, and what they looked like in London. And then you can see them being packed up. And you can see them getting into crates, and then you can get drone shots of the train going through Europe and all the way down into Greece. And then you would see the huge crowds that would gather in Athens outside the new Acropolis.
Another Odyssey.
Yeah, and the...
it'd be like the end of Star Wars.
And all exactly. And the Prime Minister and President of the Hellenic Republic would be there with the King of England and the Prime Minister of England shaking hands as you watch these things go into the spaces where they belong. And it would be a classy act on the part of the British. Yeah. And we would be admired for it. And it would not be a slippery slope to getting rid of everything else. Everyone knows the special, exceptional meaning of the Parthenon and so on. So,
because we're not really, the Greeks aren't really asking for all the antiquities to come
back.
It's just
not.
It's a certain number. I forget what it was.
Exactly. The ones that have a genuine kind of foundational meaning to the idea of the Hellenic Republic and the Greek people. It's going to happen, I promise.
What, this year, do you think?
Probably not this year.
Okay.
But like so many human things, you get stuck on a word. And that word is loan.
Okay.
Yes.
British museum people have said, yes, we'd agree that we would loan them, and perhaps even a permanent loan, certainly a loan without a fixed date of return. And the Greek government goes, no, we can't accept the word loan because they belong to us. And you think, no, we cannot get stuck on such a simple four-letter word.
Okay, so is it the British Museum? Are they trying to say face, maybe, do you think?
Yes, that's right. So it's just a way of, in the jargon, giving permission to each side to feel that they have the dignity and that they've done it right. And it's not impossible. I mean, good heavens. Because Socrates, worked on the Parthenon. He was a stonemason when he was a young man.
Really?
It's an extraordinary thought, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like your grandfather's watch. It doesn't work. It could be broken. It doesn't mean for anyone to walk into the museum and see it. They'd rather see how they used to look like with the colours and everything else, and that's what they can create.
Yes.
For Greece, it's like a broken watch. It doesn't work. For us, it's all chipped and... Yeah,
but it belongs. I'll find another thing I carry around with me. I hope I've got it. Lord Byron, who was around at the time, of course, of Lord Elgin, and was immediately horrified by what Elgin did at hacking away at these things and supposedly having the permission of the Sublime Porte, as the government of the Ottoman Empire was known. And he wrote a poem. He called it The Masque of Minerva. Like a lot of his generation, he used the Latin name for the gods. So Minerva, of course, is Athena. He bumps into Minerva. Mortal, 'twas thus she spake, that blush of shame proclaims thee Britain, once a noble name, first of the mighty, foremost of the free, now honoured less by all and least by me, because of the theft of the marbles. Byron tries to wriggle out of it in a very, very Byronic fashion. I dared reply to soothe the vengeance kindling in her eye. Daughter of Jove, in Britain's injured name, a true-born Briton may the deed disclaim. Frown not on England, England owns him not. Athena, no, thy plunderer was a Scot. Which Elgin was. I just love the idea. So no, it's not our fault.
I love that.
So it wasn't England, it was the Scots now.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's bloody
Scots.
Oh, far out.
Yeah.
Well, I love your closing remark from that debate. It endeared you to so many Greeks, and you said no matter how much the sovereign debt crisis means they owe us, we will never repay the debt that we owe Greece.
Yes.
How true is that still?
Absolutely the case. We do owe almost everything that is of value in our culture to Greece. Logic being a very important one from Aristotle. But just the openness to questions, that really is it. And it is the foundation of the Enlightenment, and it's the foundation of everything that gave us democracy and our elements of freedom that we have. And they are under threat. They are, the religion, the dark forces of religion, where you have to accept a text on the authority of an imam or a bishop or a rabbi or whoever tells you that this is the truth. The Greek tells you, well, let's have a look. Let's see. Is it true? Where does it come from? What does it mean? Let's debate it. Let's think about it. Let's have a conversation, a dialect about it.
Which reminds me of another of your quotes from another Intelligence Squared, the debate with Christopher Hitchens with the Catholic Church. It is the only owner of the truth for the billions it likes to boast about.
Yes, exactly, and that's
very
clearly
powerful.
Yeah, it's nonsense, and it's a shame. I have nothing against religious people who are devout and pious and wish to get on their knees and talk to their God, but it's only when it's used as a dominating, suppressive force of power and claims authority, an authority that is unprovable and comes from nothing. I mean, you can look at these texts, and some of them contain some very beautiful thoughts and ideas, and some preposterous ones, some absolutely absurd ones. And that's also true of Greek myth. Some of them are really quite silly, but nobody suggests that you live your life according to Greek myth. It doesn't tell you that this is how you must be. It is there for us to investigate and examine as free minds. And that's what the Greeks did. They freed our minds.
Brilliant. Unbelievable. Well, I want to talk briefly about the influence on popular culture because, American culture in particular, has, as I mentioned earlier, has done a lot for bringing up Greek myths and borrowing from it in things like films or comic books and whatever. When you were sitting down to write Troy, for example, how difficult was it to ignore Brad Pitt's flowing locks? I know you swoon when you see him, but it's the Cecil B. DeMille effect. Like if you didn't see it in one of those films, like the Ten Commandments or Ben-Hur or something like that, it didn't play out that way.
That's it. It's very true. I did manage to ignore the film of Troy, but one was aware very much, of course, of the fact that in popular culture these and you mentioned Jason the Argonauts, and the classic movie of Jason the Argonauts was huge to me. I think perhaps even more influential, really, in the nature of Greek myth is the storytelling franchises that are so huge now, whether it's George R.R. Martin and his Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones stories, or it's J.R.R. Tolkien and his, they have nostos stories. It's actually called The Hobbit, There and Back Again. It's a home journey. They've all got these quests and these journeys home. And of course the MCU, as they call it, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and indeed the J.K. Rowling magical universe. There's still a great desire. And it's very understandable, I think, partly because what you read about the academics in America, it's so much now in any novel you write or try and write or read is what you might call the discourse. That's to say, if someone writes a novel now, it is almost impossible, if it's set in the present, for it not to address our current anxieties and neuroses about race and gender and politics and culture. And if you don't, people think, well, what is this book? Yeah. So what you do is you do what Wagner recommended, is you take myth, which is stripped of that context, and you get humanity in the raw. Brilliant. And you don't point at Game of Thrones and say, but that's not how people go to work, because it's its own universe, and you accept it. And what you're actually seeing is the primal acts of human beings: the lust, the love, the jealousy, the betrayal, the honor, the dishonor, and you see them pure when you deal in myth. But as soon as you dress it up in a particular period, then it's about class, it's about culture, it's about the way we live today, which is a temporary and less important thing than what it actually is underneath to be human, which is permanent.
Wow. Is there a particular myth or story that resonates with you?
I suppose the story of Phaethon, who was, this boy who grows up with his mother, and his mother occasionally boasts to him, "You do know who your father is, don't you? Your father is Apollo, the sun god, or Helios, the sun god. It depends, it's kind of told both, but we might as well say Apollo because he's better. And the boy thinks, and he goes to school and he gets a bit bullied. And he says, "Don't forget my father's Apollo." And they go, "No, he's not. Your father's an Apollo." And he says, "No." So he runs away and he goes, and Apollo, of course, he knows Apollo, who is the sun god, gets up every morning in the palace at the east, where Eos, the goddess of the dawn, throws open the pearly gates, Rhododactylos, rosy-fingered dawn, opens the gates, and he takes the chariot of the sun, and over the earth he goes to the Hesperides in the west, where he settles, and then floats all the way back on the ocean stream to go east again. So he thinks, little Phaethon, "I'm going to go and get my dad, and I'm going to prove to everybody." And so he goes, and his father says, "What the hell are you? What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm your son. You're. And Apollo thinks, "Oh God, how many women? Oh, that one. Yes. Oh God. Are you my son? Oh well, how interesting. Well, what do you want of me?" "I just want to ride your chariot of the sun." "No, don't be ridiculous. You wouldn't be able to control the horses. It's absurd." "I know. I want to." And he stamps his foot and begs and says, "You promised me anything, and you've never brought me up, and you've never given me a childhood. You've never been a good father." No. "Oh, all right, you can do it. Here are the horses. You've got to be very careful. They're very powerful." I can do it. And he gets in, and of course, and the Eos opens the gates, and bang, out he goes, and he roars up into the sky far too high. He can't keep the horses down, and the ground behind him, underneath him, becomes frozen, and you get the poles and Greenland and things like that. And then suddenly he roars down and gets too close, and he burns everything up into the Sahara, and it just makes a total mess, and the whole earth is going crazy. What's happened to the sun? And Zeus looks out and thinks, "Oh God," and throws the thunderbolt, and Phaethon collapses down into Italy, funnily enough. And he had a lover, funnily enough, called Cygnus, who mourned him and was turned into a swan, which is why we have a cygnet. But that story kind of encapsulates so much of Greek myth, because it is about the younger generation trying to take on the older generation and trying too hard and failing, a bit like Icarus, again, flying too close to the sun. And I think it's so human,
Definitely. Wow.
So believable, and yet, of course, it's also so fantastic. Yeah. And it has the etiological side. So parents would say, "Do you know why there are some areas of the world that are snowy and other areas that are just desert? Once there was a boy called Phaethon who, like you, tried to do things he couldn't, and use it as a moral lesson, yes, and as an explanation of the deserts and everything else." It's and of course, in Regency times, a phaeton was a type of carriage. So
there you go. Wow.
There you go. Brilliant. You know that one?
Greek mythology, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in our modern day life.
Why is it so important, say, for the Greeks in the diaspora to keep on learning the Greek language?
Good question.
Now, a lot of it's our second language now, and it might be disappearing amongst the diaspora. Why is it so important, in your view, that we should continue to learn the Greek language?
So the Greeks listening to me who, like you, live in Australia will perhaps know just how terrible linguicide, as it's called, is, the death of languages. Aboriginal languages in Australia were rich and varied. Hundreds and hundreds, as you know, hundreds of them. Some of them unrelated to each other, some of them unique in the way that they represent the world. And they've died away, as it is. There are some great linguists. A friend of mine called Gilad Zuckerman is one at Adelaide University who goes out into the bush and records and registers and tries to restore and revitalise these languages and to teach the young people of the various people, the various tribes and groups about their language and to be proud of it. For example, it's just languages are more than just, this is the vocabulary, this is the word for potato, this is the word for a sky. It's different ways of looking at things. There are some Aboriginal people who don't use left and right, they use absolutes. In other words, they only ever use northeast, west and south when talking about it. They will say, mustard is northeast of you. Could you pass it, please? And they will always know from a very early age, the children know where north, east, south is. Whichever way they're facing, you can spin them round.
Wow.
And they will instantly know. And left and right are meaningless because, if I say, oh, look, there are the sunglasses on the table on my left, but I then turn around like that, then they're on my right. But they are always absolute in terms of their north, east, south, or westness.
Brilliant.
And obviously it's a reflection of a people who travelled and who needed to know where they were. And they could be anywhere, and they will always know where they are.
Yeah.
And so, but that's in their language.
Yeah.
And there are other languages, I think this one is not in Australia, but it's a really fascinating one, where the past is seen as in front of you, and the pronouns they use for the past. You see, we say back in the 1960s, and they would say forward to the 1960s because the past is ahead of them, the future is behind them. Who knows what's behind us going to come? You and you think that's so illogical. How can a people think that the past is up ahead and the future is behind? Because we're so used to behind. And they will say, well, we know the past, so we can see it. Because we've experienced it. It's in front of us. There it is, the past.
Brilliant.
But the future is a mystery. So it's behind us. We can't see it. And you think, oh, yes.
That makes sense.
Interesting.
You see, it's just another way of perceiving the reality into which we were born. And we're so used to thinking of our way. And unfortunately, because of its cultural kind of sovereignty around the world, English as being the way to represent reality, the only way. Well, Greek is a different language. It's from the same family, Proto-Indo-European family, and English has a huge amount that's descended from Greek, of course. But Greek is a connection to the land from which your ancestors came and from which they sprang, and it's also the language of Euripides and Sophocles and Plato and some of the most foundational and important thinkers and writers that the world has known. And to be born with a Greek surname, say, and to know that your names are Greek and your grandfathers and grandmothers were Greek, is an immense privilege, and it's one that you can repay by familiarising yourself with the language, and it's really important to do, I think.
Yeah, brilliant.
Fantastic.
Well done. It's hard to compare when you say Greek, trying to compare it to English. It doesn't really match up.
No, that's true. But, I mean, there are certain things that Greeks... I'm going to go off on this one because I love it so much. But the Greeks noticed... I talked about the forces that move things, and you call them gods. And this has always been interesting to science, a thing that moves things. You have to try and explain motion and force. And that's really what physics is all about, motion and force, whether it's gravity with Einstein or what earlier ideas of so on. And the Greeks noticed that if you took a piece of amber and you rubbed it on silk or on some other material, it would then attract dust and feathers and things like that. We know this is static electricity, of course, and they were fascinated because something that wasn't touching something else would move towards it. It was action at a distance, which is incredibly important in science, action at a distance. But also in Thessaly, in an area called Magnesia, there were stones, rocks, that attracted iron. They would think that the iron would hit it. So there are these two types of action at a distance. And magnesia, the stone that came from magnesia, would be called magnetite, and the word magnet arrived. And it was a mystery for hundreds and hundreds of years as to what the force was that could pull a piece of iron towards a rock. What was it? It's fascinating. Well, the Greek for amber is electron. That's what the word is. Sure. So when people wanted to talk about this other force, what is this other force, this that moves the feathers and the dust towards the electron, they called it amberinous electricity. And so you had electricity and you had magnets. And they were two forces that were inexplicable until the 19th century, when Faraday and then Clerk Maxwell, most importantly, wrote these extraordinary formulae, these algorithms, these equations, as they would be called, which united magnetism and electricity. You could make electricity out of a magnet, you could get the force, and the other way round. They were one, a unified field. And that allowed everything that is making our conversation possible to be heard by the people listening. Wow. Because the electricity and the magnetism created from that great Greek word tele, which means at a distance, the action at a distance was telecommunication, it was telephone, it was telegram, it was television, it was everything. Suddenly, that was the magic. And the Greeks were the first to notice it with the little amber, the electron, and the magnet. Yeah. So that's just an example of why it is worth knowing the words.
Fantastic.
And how important they are.
Great question. Well done.
What about the answer?
I know. Well, that's
It's like a mic drop.
Absolutely. Well, look, I think we're coming to the end here now, so let's wrap. I want to ask you. I remember a story that you told at the Opera House here over a decade ago. I can't believe it's over a decade now, but about shaking someone's hand and him telling you whose hand his hand had shaken.
Yes.
So when we shake your hand, whose hand are we actually shaking?
Oh my goodness! Well, you've shaking the hand of someone who's shaken the hand of some heroes of mine like Christopher Hitchens, like Steve Jobs and Douglas Adams and people like that. And the story I was telling was I was a student at Cambridge when I noticed that the drama club I was president of, which was called the Mummers, had been founded 50 years earlier in 1931 by a guy called Alistair Cook, who was a journalist who used to do the Letter from America, not Alistair Cook, the cricketer. So I wrote to him, care of BBC New York, saying, you may remember finding this club, and I don't suppose you'll be in England in the next few months, but the actual anniversary is we were planning to have a dinner at Trinity Hall, and if you were around, you would, of course, be our guest of honour, and maybe you could make a little speech telling us how you founded the club. And he wrote back and said, I had no plans to be in England, but your letter has changed that. I'm coming over just to be at the dinner. I was like, wow. So he came over and sat next to me, and at one point, in a very American way, he said, where is the men's room? And I said, oh, well, he's just through there. He said, well, come along then. And so I sort of went with him. Then he had a pee, and he combed his hair and washed his hands and everything, and he sat on by the thing, and then he was chatting, and clearly he was thinking of what his speech was going to be, because it was all improvised. And he said, shake my hand. And I shook his hand, and he said, this hand shook the hand of Bertrand Russell, the great mathematician and philosopher. And I thought, wow, I've shaken that. And he said, oh no, it goes better. He said, Bertrand Russell's aunt danced with Napoleon. Wow, that's close. He knew Robert Browning. So, and it's that closeness. And I remember telling my father that story, and he said, he said, I was listening to the radio, or wireless as he called it. I was listening to the wireless when I was a boy, and I heard Sibelius, the conductor, talking. It was an old man, the Finnish conductor, Sibelius. And he spoke about how his first copyist had been a copyist for Beethoven. And there's a man talking to you on the radio, and you just think, these connections are much closer than you think. It's really astonishing. And I have been, very lucky. So, you know, in 20 years' time, if I'm still alive and I'm in my 80s, people can say, I'll shake your hand, and this hand shook Steve Jobs, really? And that'll seem quite amazing, you know. But I remember also being at a dinner at the BBC when they were celebrating 75 years of the BBC, so it was some time ago. And there was this old lady next to me, and I'd heard that she was Marchesa something, an Italian aristocratic title, the wife of a marquis. And we were having a lovely conversation. She was really fascinating. And then she turned away and talked to someone else. And the other person on the other side was Prince Edward, one of the Queen's sons. And he said, gosh, you're so lucky to talk to her. And I said, who exactly is she? And he said, you don't know? She's the widow of Marconi. She was married to the man who invented radio.
Oh, wow.
I was sitting talking to... Now, he married her when he was really pretty old, and she was quite young, so that's why she was still alive. But nonetheless, that's pretty astonishing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because without radio, you couldn't have... You know, it's all very well Orville and Wilbur Wright having the aeroplane, but you couldn't have air traffic without radio first. It's like you can't have... You know, skyscrapers without someone inventing the lift, or they just wouldn't work. And the radio, for God's sake, to sit next to the woman who was married to the man who invented radio. I just felt like, wow.
And you shook her hand.
I shook her hand.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I shook the hand of a woman whose intimate parts had been played with by. She wanted. If you want to put it that way.
I mean, I was going to say Robin Williams, for example. Like,
well, I did
Hitch.
also have a rude one, which was the great English actor John Gielgud, Sir John Gielgud. I was doing a film and he was in it, and he said, "Oh, come and have lunch with me," and it was at Ealing Studios, and they had these beautiful old dressing rooms, and his man, his valet, had laid out a lunch in his dressing room, and I went along. He said, "I want to talk to you about Oscar," and I'd made this film about Oscar Wilde.
Yeah,
brilliant
he said,
film.
He said, "Yes,
I went to his tomb, by the way, in Paris.
In the Père Lachaise,
Yeah, I've seen it.
Isn't it something? And he said, I very much enjoyed your film. He said, you know that my first great success in the theatre was called Richard of Bordeaux. It was a great success. And the producer said to me, you can do anything you want afterwards. And this was in 1920, whatever it was. I said, I want to do The Importance of Being Earnest. Now, Oscar Wilde had died in 1900, and no one had done his plays in the West End since the scandal that ruined his life. But because Gielgud was the coming star, they said he could do it. And he said, well, my dresser on Richard of Bordeaux said, what are we doing next, Mr. Gielgud? And I said, oh, we're going to do The Importance of Being Earnest. And he said, oh, I had her. I said, I beg your pardon? He said, oh, yes. He said, Oscar, I knew Oscar. He'd like to be blown. I blew Oscar. And then Gielgud said,
I think the podcast is starting now.
He said, that's it. So, of course, for good luck, I had to blow my dresser. And I then got on my knees and said, well, now it's my turn. He said, no, nothing lives down there anymore.
What a classic.
So there was, in the church, that's known as the apostolic succession, that St. Peter blessed other apostles who then blessed other apostles, and all the way down to every priest in the world, whenever they're made a priest. Yeah. They have the hands laid on them that were laid on them and that were laid on them. Yes. And so I very nearly managed to do the blowjob to the blowjob to the blowjob to Oscar Wilde, but it didn't quite happen because of that wonderful line, no, nothing lives down there.
What a classic.
Anyway, listen, that's a good way to end, isn't it?
It is. I was going to
They call it Greek love.
Yes.
That's it. Let's wrap it up.
Yeah, look, Stephen, unbelievable. We could talk for 4 days with everything that you know. Thank you so much for being on this podcast and for bringing this part of our Odyssey to an end. Make sure you guys read the books as well.
Oh, bless you. And thank you for doing this podcast. It's really important. And thank you, Ευχαριστώ to everyone in the diaspora listening, and keep the blue and white flag flying, and more importantly, the spiritual flag of Greece.
Beautiful.
Flying.
Thank you. Well said, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, ouzotalk@outlook.com is the email. Follow us on social media @Ouzo Talk and @Ouzo_talk. Also on YouTube as well. Nick Athanasiou and the great Stephen Fry. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Ακολουθήστε μας στο Soundees, στο Spotify, στο Apple Podcasts και στο Google Podcasts.